Rob Endsley here from the Outdoor Line at 710 ESPN Seattle. You know, wild steelhead are rolling into our coastal rivers right now in pretty good numbers. Southwest Washington rivers are seeing a lot of steelhead as well. And one of my favorite ways to catch them is with a pink rubber worm. How do you set that up? How do you fish it? Here's one of my favorite setups. This is developed actually by my good friend Bob Ball over at Piscatorial Pursuits. He's a guide in Forks. You know, we used to float fish these things and did really well on them. But he started drift fishing them quite a while ago. And what he does, he runs about a 2-foot leader down to a Danny Joe's high floater. This is one of the main worms. It's called a high floater for a reason. It floats up real nice off the bottom. This is a 6-inch worm with a number 10 winner. Okay, this is a winner cheater right in front of the deal here. Basically what this is a spin and glow without wings on it. And it just gets that thing floating up nice and high off the bottom. You run a real short leader because you don't want this floating up too high off the bottom. You want it, you know, a foot to 2 feet up where it's still in the strike zone. 2-aught Mustad Ultra Point hook. And what I've got a bead. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a bead between the hook and the worm that keeps that worm from tearing. Okay, when you hang up on the bottom, when you set the hook, if you don't have a bead or something in there, you'll tend to tear that worm, and once you tear it, the worm's kind of shot. You need to put a new one on. What you want to do with these worms, well, once again, these are Danny Joe's high floaters, is you use a bait threader. This happens to be a Pro Cure bait threader. There's some other styles too. There's a tube style bait threader where you can run your line through the center of the tube. That works on up to about 10-pound test. But these are pretty standard. You can find them at any of the tackle shops. And you thread the worms and off you go. So that's a great drift fishing setup. We've just got a swivel in there with some pencil lead. And another great way to fish them too is on a float. Now this works real nice because you don't lose as much gear. If you're going to float fish with a pink worm, make sure you use a worm that sinks, okay? Now this is a worm made by Zoom. It's a sinking pink worm, comes from the bass industry, of course. But they started cranking out some pink worms for us steelhead guys. Those are from Zoom right there. If you use a worm that floats, of course, when you're float fishing, the worm's going to be way up above your lead and it's not going to be in the strike zone. Use one that sinks and you'll be right down there in the zone, okay? And I like to use a fixed float. This is 30-pound braid. And what I'll do with this float, this is just a regular 6-inch dink float. I put a rubber band around it and I run the line straight through. That rubber band helps catch that float on there and grabs the line there. If you actually wrap this braided line around the float, when you set the hook, if you wrap it around this dink float, it'll actually cut right through the middle of the float. So you need to run your line straight through, put a rubber band on it. That way you can run this float up and down the line. And I like to use a fixed float a lot more than a sliding float for steelhead in the spring, because I can push this down. All I got to do is reel the float up to my rod tip if I want to adjust the depth. I just reel down on it a little bit and I can shove that float down without having to look for that bobber stop. So there you go, a couple of ways to catch wild steelhead on a pink worm here in Washington. Now's the time. Steelhead are coming in and it's been pretty good out on the coast there. Just a little tip for you to put some more fish in the boat. Rob Endsley from the Outdoor Line. Don't forget to tune in Saturdays from 6 to 8 a.m. Thanks for watching.